She laughed when he said he'd be representing himself. But 20 minutes into his argument, the courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. It was listening. Fulton County Courthouse in Georgia wasn't usually this full on a Tuesday morning. But today, Courtroom 4B felt more like a stage than a legal chamber. Reporters filled the benches in the back, law students lined the walls, and attorneys from neighboring counties even snuck in just to watch. There was a kind of quiet tension in the room, the kind that told you something strange was about to happen. You just didn't know what yet. Judge Riddell sat at the bench, scanning the room through his thick glasses, tapping his pen against the wood. No one spoke above a whisper. Then the door opened. Victoria Langford, sharp suit, sharper reputation, strode in with the kind of authority that didn't need to be announced. You didn't have to like her to respect her. With 30 years of courtroom wins and a name that made even seasoned prosecutors sit straighter, she walked with purpose to the plaintiff's table, heels clicking with each confident step. No assistant, no junior partner, just her. A few people leaned in to whisper, "That's Langford." "Yeah, pro bono, I heard. Wants to prove a point." She dropped her briefcase with a thud and glanced around, unimpressed. She was used to bigger trials, federal courts, national media. But today, it was civil court. Small venue, big message. She was here to swat down what she thought was a pointless case filed by a kid too proud to back down. That kid walked in exactly 2 minutes later. Jalen Merriweather didn't wear power. He wore a wrinkled navy suit that looked like it came from a church thrift store. The tie was uneven. The shoes, scuffed. But he didn't look scared. He looked prepared. Not cocky, just ready. Some people chuckled when they saw him. He carried a slim folder. No briefcase. No lawyer beside him. Victoria's eyes locked on him. She didn't blink. He took the defendant's table, alone, and placed his folder down gently. Then he sat. The bailiff announced the case. Merriweather v. Cobb County Police Department. A civil rights claim. False arrest. Excessive force. Victoria leaned over toward the judge's bench. "Your Honor, I just want to clarify. We're proceeding with Mr. Merriweather representing himself?" Judge Riddell nodded. "He's waived his right to counsel." She smiled, but it wasn't kind. "All right then. Let's hope the court's patience is as generous as the Constitution." There were a few light chuckles in the gallery. Jalen didn't flinch. He looked down at his folder, then up at the judge. "I'm ready, Your Honor." The judge raised an eyebrow, then motioned. "Mr. Merriweather, this is your opening." Victoria sat back with her arms folded. She didn't expect much. Neither did the room. But what she didn't know, what no one in that room realized, was that this boy had been preparing for months. Not in a law firm, not in a classroom, but in public libraries, on borrowed books with a notebook and a voice recorder. He hadn't come to play lawyer. He'd come to show everyone what people miss when they stop listening. But it would take only a few sentences to make the room realize this wasn't going to go the way anyone thought. Victoria didn't even try to hide her amusement. She shifted in her chair, half-turned to glance at the gallery like a performer waiting for her audience to appreciate the show. Then she turned her focus back to the young man standing behind the table, hands flat, no laptop, no legal team, just him and a folder. "Go ahead," she said, just loud enough for him to hear. "Give us your best YouTube monologue." Jalen glanced her way, then back at the judge. No response. No smirk. Just stillness. He began slowly. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the court." Victoria leaned toward her notepad and scribbled something. A smirk tugged at her mouth. Jalen continued. "What happened to me outside of a gas station in Smyrna wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't even about suspicion. It was about power being used carelessly and a system that lets it happen." That got a few people to look up. But Victoria wasn't impressed. She rose with a quick motion. "Your Honor, I know we're entertaining Mr. Merriweather's performance, but is there a limit to how many generalities we're going to allow before facts enter the room?" Judge Riddell gave her a measured look. "It's an opening statement, Ms. Langford. You'll have your turn." She raised her hands lightly, backed off, and sat. Of course. Jalen looked at her once before continuing. I was handcuffed in front of a store I'd just bought chips from. I was searched without a warrant, detained without cause, and the officer didn't even ask for my ID until after I was in the back seat of the car. He paused. Then, I'm 18 years old, but today I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for accountability, and I'll be doing that by walking you through my case, step by step, with legal precedent, timelines, and statements that show this wasn't a mistake. It was a violation. There it was. That sentence changed the temperature in the room. Subtle, but real. Several people in the gallery straightened. One man whispered, "Did he say legal precedent?" Victoria caught that too. She narrowed her eyes. Still, she stood again. Your Honor, I assume he'll eventually share this so-called evidence. I'd hate for us all to hear a speech and forget we're in a courtroom. The judge didn't hide his irritation this time. Ms. Langford, I said you'll have your turn. Sit down. That earned a soft, "Ooh," from the gallery. Victoria sat, straightened her blouse, crossed her legs. But her foot started tapping. Jalen went on. In the next hour, I'll reference 3 specific Supreme Court rulings, introduce a time-stamped video, and call Officer Drew Caldwell to the stand. My only request is that the court listen with the same seriousness it gives anyone who walks in here with a $600 suit and a title. A few jaws tightened. Some of the reporters lifted their pens. The judge leaned back, staring at the boy for a second longer than he usually would. Then gave a small nod. Proceed. Victoria's mind was already spinning. Supreme Court rulings, time-stamped video, Officer Caldwell. She flipped through her folder and found no mention of video evidence. Nothing about new witnesses, no filings. She looked to the clerk, who shrugged. Evidently everything had been submitted properly. How? She whispered to herself. Who coached this kid? Jalen turned a page in his folder and lifted his head. I'd like to begin by calling Officer Caldwell to the stand. Victoria stood quickly. Objection. We haven't cross-checked any witness lists. The judge cut her off. He filed his witness list 3 weeks ago. You were notified. She paused. I didn't receive... The clerk interrupted. It was emailed and faxed to your office. For the first time that morning, Victoria didn't have a comeback. But she wasn't done yet. If this boy thought quoting a few cases and pointing fingers would rattle her, he had no idea what kind of courtroom war he just started. The court officer led Officer Drew Caldwell to the stand, tall, clean-cut, in a grey uniform with creases sharp enough to suggest he ironed them himself that morning. He looked confident, at first. Jalen approached the podium with calm steps, adjusting his glasses as he glanced down at his notes. His hand didn't shake. Not once. He began without raising his voice. Officer Caldwell, you reported that on February 11th, at approximately 4:36 p.m., you were called to respond to a suspicious individual outside the Citgo gas station on South Cobb Drive. Is that correct? Caldwell nodded. That's correct. And this individual, me, was doing what when you arrived? You were loitering near the store entrance. Jalen tilted his head slightly. Loitering. Right. Now I'd like the court to look at Exhibit A, security footage from that location, time-stamped 4:34 p.m. to 4:38 p.m., which I submitted with my filings. The screen lit up as the bailiff played the video. There it was, a grainy but clear image of Jalen, standing for less than 45 seconds outside the gas station before walking in. 2 minutes later, he walked out, chip bag in hand, then paused to check his phone. 30 seconds later, a patrol car rolled into frame. That was all. Jalen didn't say anything. He waited. The silence in the courtroom was louder than the video. Officer Caldwell, Jalen said, do you still stand by your claim that I was loitering? Caldwell hesitated. In that neighborhood, hanging around like that, people call it loitering. So you define loitering by location, not behavior. Victoria stood. Objection. Argumentative. Overruled, the judge replied without hesitation. Jalen didn't flinch. Let me ask again. Was there a posted sign saying, no loitering? No. Did you ask me to move along? No. Did I resist arrest? Pause. You were non-compliant. Let's define non-compliant. I asked you why I was being handcuffed. You didn't answer. You told me to stop resisting after I raised my hands and turned around. Jalen looked back at the screen. There's no audio, unfortunately, but the footage shows me raising my hands, clearly, and turning around. Would you agree? Caldwell shifted. Yes. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't run. No. So if this were anyone else, someone in khakis maybe, someone who didn't look like me, would you still have acted the same way? Victoria sprang up. Objection! Speculative and inflammatory. Sustained, the judge said, but with a tone that suggested the question wasn't without merit. Jalen paused. He looked directly at Caldwell. I'm not here to make enemies, but you took something from me that day. You took safety. You took dignity. And you filed a report with half the facts. I read every word. Caldwell stayed quiet. Jalen turned back to the judge. That's all for now. He returned to his table and sat, calmly stacking his notes. Victoria rose. She didn't waste time. Officer Caldwell, please clarify, did you feel threatened? Yes. Why? The store had recent incidents. We had a call. He matched the description. Which was? Young male, dark hoodie, lingering. That sounds pretty general. It's what we were given. She turned to the jury. Officers don't get the luxury of waiting. They act to prevent crime before it happens. Mr. Merriweather's experience may have felt intrusive, but was it unlawful? That's the real question. She sat, a satisfied look on her face. Jalen raised his hand slightly. Your Honor, may I respond? The judge nodded. Jalen stood again, calmly. I wasn't wearing a hoodie that day. I wore this exact jacket, a navy blazer. The officer's description doesn't match, and the footage proves I didn't linger more than 2 minutes before entering the store. He walked closer to the jury box. I'm not asking you to imagine anything. I'm asking you to watch the tape and read the report. Then ask yourself, how often does someone have to explain that they didn't do something after they're already treated like they did? He walked back slowly. But even that wasn't the strongest part of his argument. That was still coming, when he'd reveal exactly how much time he spent preparing for this trial, and just how deep his knowledge really went. Before the jury could fully process what they had just seen, Jalen took a deep breath. His voice slowed, softened, not out of hesitation, but to make sure every word landed. I'd like to take you back, he said. Not with evidence, not with charts. Just a moment. One I haven't forgotten, and probably never will. He stepped away from the podium and stood in the open space between the tables, his hands by his side. It was a Thursday afternoon, February 11th. I had just finished my shift at Warehouse Station in Austell. Stocking. 5 hours straight, no break. I stopped at the Citgo on South Cobb because I needed snacks. And honestly, I was just tired. He glanced toward the jury, then the judge. I wasn't thinking about how I looked. I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't prepared to defend myself in the parking lot of a gas station. The room was quiet. I walked out with a bag of Doritos and an orange soda. I paused to check my phone. Group text from my cousin. Nothing urgent. I started to head to my car and there he was. Patrol car pulled in fast, like they were already sure I did something. Jalen took a beat. Officer Caldwell stepped out, told me to stop. I said, "What's the problem?" No answer. Just told me to put my hands on the hood. I hesitated for maybe 2 seconds. That's when he said I was resisting. Someone in the gallery shifted. It was the kind of detail that hit different when you pictured it. He cuffed me. Tight. The kind that leaves marks for hours. Started patting me down. Asked if I had anything sharp on me. I said, "You still haven't told me what this is for." Jalen looked directly at the jury now. You ever try to stay calm while your blood's boiling? While people walk by and stare at you like you're some kind of threat? He turned slightly, speaking slower now. There was a woman and her little girl, maybe 7, 8 years old. They stopped at the pump next to me. The girl saw me in cuffs and held her mom's hand tighter. Like I was dangerous, he swallowed. She didn't know me, but that moment stuck with me. That little girl looked at me like I wasn't human, like she had been taught something already, and I'd just confirmed it. Even Victoria didn't move. Her eyes locked on him, Her smirk was long gone. I wasn't charged, wasn't fined. I was let go 20 minutes later with a half apology and a "have a good day." They said it was a mix-up, that they got the wrong guy. He scoffed lightly. But there's no refund for dignity, no receipt for being treated like a threat. And if I had yelled, if I had gotten angry, this case wouldn't exist. I'd be a file, maybe a clip on the news. Jalen walked back to the podium, no script in hand. I filed this case not because I want money. I'm not asking for pity. I filed it because I'm tired of being told to just move on when nothing changes. I filed it because every time someone tells me the system works, I wonder. For who? He let that question hang in the air. The judge glanced down, pretending to scribble something. But everyone in that courtroom knew he was really giving the moment space to breathe. Even Officer Caldwell looked different now. His mouth was a tight line. His fingers gripped the edge of the witness box. Jalen flipped a page in his folder. I'll now refer to Terry v. Ohio, a 1968 Supreme Court decision, and explain why what happened to me goes beyond a mistake and qualifies as a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights. Victoria closed her eyes for a split second. This kid knew Terry, but she couldn't afford to let emotion win. Not yet. If this trial was turning into a battle of knowledge, she was going to dig in and dig deep. Victoria adjusted her chair with a sharp twist, the leather creaking under her. She flipped through her notes again, hoping to find a crack in Jalen's story. She wasn't rattled, yet, but something had shifted. The boy had poise, sure. But now, quoting Terry v. Ohio? That wasn't YouTube-level bluff. That was law school material. Jalen faced the jury again. In Terry v. Ohio, the court ruled that a police officer may stop a suspect on the street and frisk them without probable cause, only if they have a reasonable suspicion that the person has committed, is committing, or is about to commit a crime. He looked to Officer Caldwell. You claimed I was loitering, but the video shows I entered the store almost immediately. I didn't walk back and forth. I didn't talk to anyone. I wasn't standing near another car or acting suspicious. Caldwell stayed silent. Jalen's voice firmed up. So what made you suspicious enough to search me? Was it my height? My clothes? Or just me? Victoria stood up, smooth and deliberate. Objection. We've already addressed this. He's baiting the witness. The judge looked tired. Sustained. Keep your questions focused, Mr. Merriweather. Yes, Your Honor. Jalen nodded, then turned the page. Let's talk about the report, he said. Officer Caldwell, your written statement says I mouthed off when asked to place my hands on the hood. Caldwell nodded. Do you remember what I said exactly? You asked why you were being detained. You sounded irritated. So asking a question is now mouthing off? Caldwell didn't answer. Jalen walked to the clerk's desk. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit B, an audio recording from my phone. I had it running when the incident occurred. Victoria blinked. What? It was in my pocket. The screen cracked, but the mic worked. The audio's been authenticated. The judge leaned forward. Has this been reviewed? The clerk nodded. Submitted with the evidence packet, time-stamped and cleared. Victoria clenched her pen. The audio played. Jalen's voice was heard clearly. Officer, what's going on? Then a firm voice, Caldwell's, saying, Don't talk. Hands on the car. Silence. Then Jalen again. What's this for? Then cuffs clicking. That was it. There was no yelling, no curse words, no threats. Just a young man confused and calm, being cuffed without explanation. The courtroom was dead quiet. Jalen turned the audio off. Is that the voice of someone mouthing off, Officer Caldwell? Caldwell cleared his throat but said nothing. Jalen looked at the jury. That was the full extent of our exchange before the handcuffs, just those 2 sentences, and that was enough for a full search, a detainment, and a report that now says I was uncooperative. He turned back to the judge. Your Honor, at this time I'd like to rest my questioning of the witness. The judge nodded. Victoria stood slowly, tapping her folder once before walking toward Caldwell. Officer Caldwell, she began. Is it possible that what Mr. Merriweather perceives as unfair treatment was, in fact, a necessary safety procedure, given the location and call you received? He nodded. It's possible. And you were alone. correct? Yes. And your job is to respond swiftly and cautiously? Yes. Would you describe your actions as malicious? No. Victoria turned to the jury. See, this is the complexity of real life. Split-second decisions, tense environments. Not everything is textbook. Not everything fits into court arguments and edited clips. She closed her folder. That's all. It was clean, professional. But no one in the room looked convinced. Even the jurors glanced at one another. That audio had done something no argument could. It felt real. Jalen sat back down, and for the first time, let out a small breath. But he wasn't finished. Because next, he was going to explain how he built this case, without a degree, without funding, and without a mentor. And that was going to flip everything. Victoria sat back in her chair, legs crossed, but her pen had stopped moving. For years, she'd dismantled arguments from trained attorneys. But now, every tactic she tried slid off this kid like water. Jalen wasn't cracking, not from pressure, interruption, or courtroom theatre. And worse, he was getting stronger. Judge Rodell turned to Jalen. You may proceed with your next point. Jalen stood again, calm as ever, and picked up a worn black notebook. Its pages were soft at the corners, creased, stained, full of tabs. Not a legal pad, not a fancy binder, just a regular used-up notebook. I brought this, he said. Not for show, but because it's where this whole case started. He held it up. This notebook has 122 pages. I filled every one of them in the 6 weeks after I was detained. Not with emotion, not with anger, but with facts. Case law, notes, definitions, timelines, and mistakes. A lot of them. He flipped it open to a dog-eared page. Page 42, United States v. Brignoni-Ponce, 1975. The Supreme Court ruled that ethnicity alone is not a valid reason for law enforcement to stop a vehicle. That decision was built on the same foundation we're standing on here today. He looked up. I studied every night after work. I borrowed books from the Smyrna Public Library. I watched videos of real trials, read transcripts. There's a retired paralegal named Mrs. Elva Romero who volunteered to quiz me every Sunday at the community center. She never charged me $1. A quiet murmur rolled through the room. And no, I've never stepped inside a law school, but I know what the Constitution says, and I know when someone violates it. Victoria interrupted, her voice louder than before. So now you're saying you know better than trained officers and licensed attorneys? Jalen didn't miss a beat. I'm saying the law belongs to the people, not just the ones with the title. Somewhere in the back, a woman muttered, That's right. Victoria walked up to the podium again. Tell me, Mr. Merriweather, when you were reading all those books, did any of them tell you about Graham v. Connor? How officers have to be judged based on what seems reasonable in a split second, not by perfect hindsight? Jalen smiled slightly. Page 67, he said. Graham v. Connor, 1989. Yes, I know it. The standard is objective reasonableness. But that doesn't mean we ignore obvious mistakes. It means we look at what a reasonable officer would do, not just what this officer did. Victoria pressed. And who decides what's reasonable? You? The jury does, he said without blinking. She didn't respond. Jalen turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I have no more witnesses. I've made my argument. I've presented the facts. I'll rest my case shortly. But I want to say one final thing. The judge gestured for him to continue. I didn't bring this case to embarrass anyone. I'm not asking this courtroom to hate cops or to tear the system down. I'm asking for accountability. For someone to finally say, yes, this happened, and it shouldn't have. That's all. He walked slowly back to his seat and sat. Folded his hands. Exhaled. Victoria stood to deliver her closing, but she hesitated. What was left to say? She had come expecting a show trial, a kid making noise for attention. But this was law, delivered without polish, but with more impact than most closing arguments she'd ever heard. She walked to the center of the room and tried anyway. The law is messy, and it's easy to forget that officers have to make decisions in imperfect situations. What happened to Mr. Merriweather is unfortunate. But was it illegal? That's your decision. She sat down. No dramatic exit, No sweeping final words, just silence. But silence wasn't a bad sign. Not this time, because the jurors weren't disengaged. They were thinking, replaying what they heard. And that meant Jalen's words had already taken root. The judge called for a 15-minute recess before the closing statements. As the courtroom slowly emptied, Victoria remained seated, her fingers interlocked tightly, eyes fixed on the floor in front of her. She wasn't defeated, but she was rattled. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure she had the upper hand. Jalen didn't look around for approval. He stayed seated, flipping through his notebook, making one last set of notes. The room didn't feel like a victory lap to him. It felt like a test, and he wasn't sure if he'd passed yet. When the courtroom reconvened, Judge Rodell gave a quick nod. "Mr. Merriweather, you may proceed with your final statement." Jalen stood. He held the notebook in one hand but didn't look at it. "I was told this would be a waste of time," he began. "Some said I'd embarrass myself. Others said the system would swallow me whole before I ever had the chance to be heard." He paused. "But I believed something different. I believed that when you understand the rules, you can stop playing defense and start asking real questions. I believed that truth still matters, even when the people in charge don't want to hear it." He looked to the jury. "You don't need to go to law school to understand justice. You just have to care enough to study it. I didn't bring this case because I thought I could win. I brought it because I had to." He walked slowly, stopping in front of the jury box. "There's no scholarship waiting for me after this. No big legal job. I work nights, stocking shelves. I go home, I help my little brother with homework, and I fall asleep with law books on my chest. I didn't do this because I want to be famous. I did this because no one else was going to fight for me." His voice didn't tremble, but it was heavy. "I've read over 24 court opinions in the last 2 months. I've studied how arguments are structured, how precedents are used, and how truth can be buried under the right kind of language. But I also learned this. Truth gets louder when it's repeated, calmly and clearly." He turned back to the judge. "I rest my case." He sat down, and the room stayed silent. Victoria rose, walking slowly to the center of the courtroom. Her voice was quieter now. "I've spent most of my life defending institutions, police departments, city offices, people who work hard and make mistakes under pressure. That's what I thought this was at first. Just another case of a young man misreading a situation." She looked directly at Jalen. "But I was wrong about Mr. Merriweather. Not about the facts. We can all interpret those differently. But about him." She turned back to the jury. "We're trained to look for certain things in a courtroom. Posture, tone, experience. I saw a kid with none of that, and I assumed he didn't belong here. But after listening to him, I realize now he belongs here more than most of us." A stunned murmur passed through the gallery. "I'm not going to beg for your decision," she added. "I'm just going to say this. If this courtroom still values truth, then you already know what to do." And with that, she returned to her seat. The judge nodded. "Members of the jury, you are excused to deliberate." As they filed out, no one looked at Jalen like a lost kid anymore. He wasn't the story people had walked in expecting. He was something else entirely. Someone who'd pulled truth out of silence and turned it into testimony. 15 minutes passed, then 25. At minute 31, the jury returned. A woman in the front row handed the verdict slip to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. Rodell read it silently, then looked up. "In the matter of Merriweather vs. Cobb County Police Department, the jury finds in favor of the plaintiff." Jalen didn't move. Not right away. Victoria exhaled quietly. The courtroom buzzed to life. People whispered, some smiled. A few clapped before the judge banged his gavel once. "Order." Jalen looked down at his notebook, then up. But outside those courtroom walls, the real moment was still waiting, because someone was about to ask him the question that would change everything about what came next. The courtroom slowly emptied, but Jalen stayed seated. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at the folded verdict in front of him, as if letting the weight of it settle somewhere deep in his chest. He had done it, on paper at least. But it wasn't the verdict that left him still. It was something else. something more difficult to explain. The judge had already retreated to his chambers. Reporters packed up their gear, and a couple of jurors gave Jalen quiet nods as they left. A few members of the gallery whispered to one another before stepping out. And then there was Victoria Langford. She remained near the defense table, standing with her briefcase half open, unmoving. Finally, she crossed the aisle. No smug grin, no backhanded compliment. Just her, facing him directly. "That was unexpected," she said softly. "I underestimated you." Jalen met her eyes. A lot of people have. A brief silence passed between them. Not awkward, just real. "You ever thought about doing this for a living?" she asked, almost like she hated herself for saying it out loud. Jalen shrugged. "I thought about it before, but I don't have the grades, or the money, or the family connections," she nodded slowly. "Neither did I when I started. Just had someone open a door I didn't know was there." He studied her, not out of awe, but curiosity. He wasn't sure if she was trying to make peace or test him one last time. "You came in ready to bury me," he said. "I did," she admitted. "And I'll probably regret saying this, but I'm glad you didn't let me." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a slim, cream-colored business card. "This is a contact at Georgia State Law. They run a community access pipeline. It's for people like you, people who don't just argue, but understand why the argument matters." He took the card, carefully, and tucked it into his notebook. "I don't expect a thank you," she added quickly. "You're not getting one," he replied, half smiling. She cracked a short laugh and walked away. Outside, the courthouse steps were packed. A local journalist from Channel 2 News was already reporting live. Just moments ago, an 18-year-old who represented himself in a civil rights lawsuit shocked everyone by winning the case without formal legal training. Another reporter approached Jalen as soon as he stepped out. "Jalen, how did you pull this off without an attorney?" He shielded his eyes from the sun. "I had a notebook, a library card, and time." A few people laughed gently, but one of the reporters asked what others were already wondering. "Do you want to be a lawyer now?" Jalen paused. He thought of the hours he spent at the library, of his little brother at home, of Mrs. Romero quizzing him on landmark cases every Sunday afternoon while sipping bitter instant coffee, of the girl at the gas station clutching her mother's hand like he was someone to be afraid of. "I don't know yet," he said. "I just wanted to be heard." That answer wasn't scripted, and that's why it worked. People weren't clapping now. They were listening. He didn't sound like a hero. He didn't need to. He sounded like someone who had just proven that effort and truth could still matter in a place designed to shut people like him down. Victoria exited the building shortly after, slipping through the crowd without stopping for cameras. One of the young law students who had watched the trial approached Jalen before he could leave. "Hey," she said, nervous. "I've got my bar exam next month, and I'm just saying, your cross-examination was cleaner than most of my practice runs." He smiled. "That's because I'm not afraid to lose." And he meant it. What he had done that day wasn't just about a verdict or a headline. It was about something deeper, more personal. He had walked into a system designed to speak at him, and forced it to listen. But his story didn't end on those courthouse steps. Because later that week, someone else would reach out, someone who saw more than a legal mind in a thrift store suit. And what they offered might just open the next door. 2 days after the trial, Jalen was back at work, stacking boxes in the back room of the same warehouse where he clocked in 5 nights a week. No cameras, no microphones, just him, a clipboard, and a steady rhythm of routine. He didn't talk about the verdict with his co-workers. Some had seen the story on the news, sure, but Jalen wasn't looking for attention. He was used to doing things quietly. That's how he'd built the whole case in the first place. It wasn't until his shift ended that he noticed the email. It was from a woman named Delphine Rivas, a program director at a legal non-profit based in Birmingham, Alabama. The subject line was simple. "Saw what you did. Let's talk." Curious, he opened it. "Jalen, we watched your case from here. Someone forwarded your cross-examination. I've never seen anything like it. We run a pre-law mentorship program for underrepresented students. Tuition's not the issue. We cover that. Commitment is. If you're interested, I'd like to talk." "Delphine," He read it twice, then a third time, before setting his phone down. That night, he didn't sleep much. The next morning, his little brother, Kellen, sat at the table eating cereal, scrolling through his phone. "You're on the internet again," he said, pointing to a video. Jalen chuckled. "Is it the part where I ask the cop why he arrested me?" Kellen shook his head. "No, it's where you said the law belongs to the people. That part's going viral." Jalen took a long sip of water and leaned back. "Good. Maybe someone else hears that and thinks, I could do that too." A knock at the front door pulled him from the conversation. It was Mrs. Elva Romero, holding a brown envelope. "I printed out your transcripts and a list of scholarship deadlines," she said. "I figured you might be getting a few calls." He smiled. "You always 5 steps ahead." 6, she said, handing over the envelope. "And I called Georgia State's community law program. They're expecting your application." He nodded slowly. "I'm thinking about it." She tilted her head. "Don't think too long. Doors open, but they don't stay open forever." After she left, Jalen sat on the porch with the envelope on his lap. He looked out over the street. Just kids riding bikes, neighbors mowing lawns, nothing special. But to him, it felt different now. Bigger. Like the world had cracked open just enough to let a little light through. Later that week, Victoria Langford was interviewed by the Marietta Daily Journal. When asked about the loss, she didn't dodge it. "I've argued in federal courts. I've gone against Ivy League-trained defense teams. But that trial? That kid? He reminded me why I got into law in the first place. It's not about credentials. It's about clarity, courage, and preparation." She paused before adding, "If he ever applies to law school, I'll write his first recommendation letter myself." When Jalen read that quote, he didn't feel pride. He felt responsibility. Because winning one case wasn't enough. It was never about revenge or headlines. It was about drawing a line in the sand and saying, "Enough." It was about proving that even when you have no badge, no license, and no title, your voice still has value. And sometimes that's all a system needs to be reminded of. So what's the moral here? It's not that brilliance hides in thrift store suits, or that every underdog gets their shot. It's this. When people stop making room at the table, you build your own. And when you speak truth with patience and precision, the right people will hear you. Jalen didn't change the world with one verdict, but he cracked the door, and someone else will walk through because of it. If that moved you even a little, subscribe. There are more stories like this to tell, and we'll keep telling them. Because truth, when told well, doesn't need an invitation to be heard. It just needs a voice.